We will not dwell on that. But the point is, here God puts in a new order of things. Says now there is sin and there is death as a consequence of sin. Now this is how you're going to live in this new environment. Now that you are subject, you're vulnerable to dying, this is how you will live. You will have what we call hard labor. Now, I know that all our lives, we work hard so that we do not have to work hard in future. Isn't that the whole rationale? Why do we wake up our children so early and send them to school? So that they do not end up doing manual labor, okay? So even when they want to play, it's like, no, it's time to do what? Study. Sit and study so that you can spend the rest of your life sitting and working. So that you can avoid hard work. You should avoid it at all costs. But here God puts in a new order and he says, now you will eat bread in the sweat of thy face. That's the new order. And I think the people who had a banner here for exercise were saying action is the law of our being. If we are to stay alive, we must follow this order. We would have dealt on that for a whole 50 minutes, but we do not have time. We have a crash course. Now, it continues. It says, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. Now, that's the second order. But it doesn't look like an order, does it? It says, till thou return unto the ground. Now, if I drop dead here, if I just get a heart attack and drop dead, do I just disintegrate into dust? I don't. What happens to me? Sorry? Someone needs a mic here. So I'll not drop dead and disintegrate to dust, will I? No, what happens? There is a process. What process is that?
I was saying that
yes, thank you.
The microbes that you are talking about will deal with you. They will eat you up until you become dust.
I saying the microbes I was talking about will eat me up until I become dust. Now, he's right. So what are they doing? Now, let's look at this. So death is a merciful plan to bring to an end all these things. So it's actually a very merciful plan. But how is that plan supposed to come to pass? There was another plan in place. And what's the name of that plan? It's on your screens. Germs. That which we call germs are God's order to bring. Now, suppose there were no microorganisms, and suppose nothing ever decayed and went back to dust. Where would we be today? Where would we be? We wouldn't be there. Because I want you to calculate. Ever since Adam and Eve died, and Abel, and every other person who died, where would they be? How many are we talking about? And we're not just talking about human beings here. We're talking about trees and animals and dead leaves and grass and everything that has ever been. How high do you think that heap would be? Life would not have been possible after that first generation. So microorganisms are part of God's plan to make life possible in a world of sin. And not just a world of sin and of death. And when we look at microorganisms from a Christian perspective, we must begin looking at them a little differently. Not as enemies that are out to annihilate us, but as God's merciful plan of making life possible. Because everything that has come from the soil must go back to the soil. And that is God's merciful plan for us. So but how do we explain? Because we said, according to the evolution theory, there are quite a number of microorganisms that are implicated in disease. And every time there is a disease condition, you will find those microorganisms present. And so it's so easy to say, it's because this is here, that's why we have this disease. So how do we explain that? And when I ask that question, I usually ask, how do we explain flies and maggots and mosquitoes? Now, for example, if something is rotting here and we have all these flies on it, now, is it rational to say this thing is rotting because of these flies? Is that a sound argument? Can we say we know why this thing is rotting? It is because of all these flies. Now, forget that one. Let's use mosquitoes. Now, every time we find stagnant water, what do we find? Mosquitoes. Can we say this water is stagnant because we have all these mosquitoes on it? Would that be a rational argument? Would that be a sound argument? That would not be a sound argument. Now, if something is rotten and it's full of maggots, can I say it is the maggots that are making this thing rot? Is that a sound argument? It's not a sound argument. So why do we think it a sound argument to say it is because we find microorganisms in disease conditions, that's why there is disease? Instead of it is because there is disease, that's why we find what? Microorganisms. Now, let's develop that thought. So this is my understanding, that germs are not a result of, they are a result of decay and not a cause of decay. And where we find supposedly disease-producing microorganisms, it is the disease that produces the microorganism. It's not the microorganisms that are the cause of disease. They are only the evidence that disease is present. They are a symptom. They only tell us that there is disease. And this is how I define disease as far as microorganisms are concerned. Disease is something was that when you die, you should decay. But every time we do things that we ought not to, we suffer decay before we do what? We die. And everywhere you find a disease where microorganisms are implicated, what are we doing? We are suffering decay